Good morning and welcome everyone. My name is Itai Ben-Har. I'm the head of the Aviv University Center for Combating Pandemics, who's hosting today this workshop of epidemics and economics. I will be very brief, although I'm greeting in English. Welcome to deliver the speech or lecture in either English or Hebrew as they have prepared and prefer. And I thank Eran Yashiv here who will head the workshop and Aviv who helped him organize the event. Thank you for coming. Eran, please.
Thank you, and I thank Itai and the Center for hosting this. So our first speaker is Neil Gandel. Let me put it on our slides.
Okay, תודה.
He's obviously from our school.
זה עובד? המיקרופון? כן? אוקיי, מצוין. Okay. Okay, well, I'm going to speak in English. It's an effort to speak in English, but I'll make that effort. I'm just kidding, of course. Okay. So this paper is a product of Maya Fuchs' thesis, and she's sitting right over here. She's an outstanding student, and she's finishing her MA. I mean, this was fantastic work, and maybe she'll go on for a PhD if we can convince her not to go to London. Okay. Anyway, so this has to do with looking at how the COVID-19 epidemic affected fatal road accidents in the U.S. Why is this slide first? Okay, that's weird. So it's missing all the introductory slides. Okay, but that's okay. I don't care. This was a challenge. I know you did this, but I can do it without that. Okay. So, no. I don't have one. No, it's okay. I can do it without it. It's actually better not to look at slides when you speak anyway. So the background for this paper is, first of all, I think most everyone can agree that fatal accidents are an objective measure of something. Okay. So that's one of the reasons why we're using fatal accidents. We're trying to measure the effect of the COVID epidemic. So one thing we can do is look at some baselines and see, the patterns in fatal accidents over time, and then see what changes occurred during the COVID period on these fatal accidents. Now, it's no surprise that fatal accidents increase. Well, maybe it is a surprise, because the number of miles driven was so much fewer and I can go to this slide for a second, in especially the first 4 months of the pandemic than it was in normal years. It's actually quite remarkable. This is the March to June 2020 period. Well, there were stay-home orders. People were a little bit freaked out, to put it mildly. Okay, so the miles driven were a lot less, and we're indeed going to focus on this period, March to June. But the amazing thing is, even though there were so little miles driven, the actual number of fatalities, road fatalities, rose. Now, these are the number of accidents with a fatality. So if there's an accident where 3 people die, it's still counted as one accident, because it's an event, and we want to focus on these events. So in some sense, this is a nice, clean way to look at things. And if you look at what happened to fatalities per mile traveled, which of course is the right way to measure it, because, for example, my car, I don't even want to talk about this, but my car doesn't drive very much. I usually ride, so you have to correct this for miles traveled. And so that's what we essentially did. I mean, you can look at COVID deaths in hospitals, but the problem is, did the person really die of COVID, or is that just what was written down? Here, it's a clear measure. Fatal car accidents, I mean, unfortunately, it's very clear and can be measured well. So I'll jump right in, especially since we skipped all the background slides about stress like that. But so there was this decline. Actually, in general, I will save you the punchline, a little bit of the punchline, and say that in general, in states that voted in higher numbers or percentages for Biden, like if this is the Biden percent of the vote, and this is fatalities for miles driven, in general, so this is fatalities per miles. In general, there's a downward slope. That means people who live in Republican states tend to have more fatalities per miles driven. Now, there's reasons for this, even in part because the distances are large, and maybe because the speed limit is greater. Indeed, when I was in Oklahoma for a few weeks this year, there was a funny speed limit sign that actually said, like it said maximum 75, which seems to be a lot. That wasn't surprising though. A lot of states have that minimum 60, and then right below the 60 it said no exceptions. So I was wondering, did it mean no exceptions for the under 60 or the over 75? And I thought, okay, it's Oklahoma. It must be, if you go under 60, you're going to get arrested. Okay. So, but anyway, for various reasons, it's probably further away from hospitals and things like that. So in any case, that's the way the standard thing looks. Of course, what's going to be interesting to us is what happened during the COVID period. We're going to compare 2020 to 2019. We'll also compare it back to 2018 to make sure we're not just picking up, other things. What's nice though is when you're looking between 2019 and 2020, not too many things that affect car accidents change. In other words, the things that affected are the density, say, of the state. Well, that stayed the same from 2019 to 2020, almost. Maybe it changed a little bit because we have, population numbers. Also, income makes a difference. It doesn't change that much. So none of these things change too much. Of course, we're going to control for them. But one thing that did change was there was this pandemic, okay, which people were especially worried about during the March to June period. So anyway, this decrease in miles that I talk about, okay, it wasn't uniform. That means in states that Biden won, there was a 28% decrease in miles on average, while in states that Trump won, there was a 19% decrease. And then when you go to July to October, we are sort of returning to normal. Well, I took that slide away. But we're going back, we're getting closer to the baseline. So the miles traveled are still less, but they're not that much less. And there's no difference between Biden and Trump states. So something was going on. Of course, in Biden states there were more lockdowns. People were maybe worried about it. So let's go on and see that. Okay. And of course, I think the punchline here, the interesting thing, we'll do some semi-complicated econometrics, but I won't probably show it because it's really simple to go look at the data and see how. That's a nice thing about this paper. You just look at the data and you kind of see the result. Okay, but in general, states that voted for Biden, okay, had a much larger percentage in fatal accidents per miles driven than they did in 2019. Now, this is the March to June period. So in that period, all the states had an increase in fatalities per miles driven, but the Biden states had a much bigger increase. Okay, for example, it was 45% if you look at all the states that Biden won. The average percentage increase in car fatalities per miles driven was 45%. And there's some northeastern states that are like way off the charts. I'll talk about them in a minute. Okay, so 45%. While in Trump states, there was a rise. There was a rise everywhere. It was only 22%. Okay, during the next 4 months, and we're always going to make this comparison, between July and October, if we look between 2019 and 2020, again, there was still an increase. There was definitely, an increase in accidents, but it was more or less the same between Biden and Trump states. So if you look, if you put on a graph the percentage of, the change in fatal accidents, the percentage change in the fatal accidents per million miles, it's very highly correlated, okay, with the vote for Biden in March to June, but then in July to October, it's not, okay? So I don't know, do we have this graph or did somebody take this one out too? No, it's here, okay. I'm glad you didn't take this one out. Okay, no, it's good, it's a challenge. I think everyone should have a few slides removed. Okay, so you can see. No, it's good actually. Okay, so this is the rate of change in these fatalities per miles driven. And if you look at March to June, and this is a fitted regression line, for those of you who don't know what that is, don't worry. Okay, and you can see it's a pretty significant slope. And if you do a simple test, that slope is statistically significant from 0. That's the March to June period. And then the July to October period, it goes back to being essentially flat. I mean, the estimated coefficient is positive, but not statistically significant from 0. So wow, that's kind of a big difference. Okay, so what could be going on? Well, there's all this background that Maya was able to find out about, where that talks about the relationship between stress and car accidents. I mean, there's no surprise that if people under stress, and we must be under a lot of stress here in Israel because people drive like maniacs, but maybe it didn't change too much during COVID. Maybe it changed for other reasons. Okay, and if you start measuring stress, like the American Psychological Association did, this was the biggest increase since 2007. Remember, 2007 was the year when the financial crisis occurred. Actually, I was watching a documentary last night on Bernie Madoff, kind of interesting. Well, not relevant for this talk, though. Okay, so, but there was an even higher stress level associated with COVID-19, and most researchers are in agreement that the probable increase in the fatalities for miles traveled had a lot to do with COVID-19. But what about this gap? I mean, why was there such a gap between Republican and Democratic states? Because remember, there was this increase, but I mean, the rate of change in fatalities per 100 million miles driven was, very positively correlated with the vote for Biden. That's the percentage turnout for Biden. Okay, and so if you start reading the literature, there's a sense that Democrats had higher stress levels than Republicans. I mean, surveys were done and validated this. Also, when there was a difference in the coverage of the pandemic, if you listened to CNN, it was like the world was coming to an end. Okay, and if you listen to Fox, they were a little bit more skeptical of the experts. And I'm not going to get it. I mean, Roy can probably talk about this more than me. I'm not going to get into this, but in general, that's the way the media kind of reported this. Okay, my brother, who lives in New York City, said, I mean, it was like sort of like an apocalypse, the way the city was, the way the city felt. Okay, and if you actually went out and asked people, like they do these surveys every year, it turns out that more Democrats were stressed out by COVID than Republicans. I mean, everyone was, on average, people were more stressed out, and they face.
This is also correcting for the fact that they live in cities where COVID was more dangerous than in rural areas.
No, these are not corrections. These are.
Even taking into account.
Yeah, I don't know. I can look into. My guess is they probably didn't do corrections like that. I mean, there's big cities in Republican states too. Like in Florida and Texas, there's pretty darn big cities, and they're giant states too. Okay, so what we did. By the way, are there any questions now? Because this is like the end of looking at
Actually, I have a question.
the graphical data.
I'm saving it to the end.
No, go ahead and ask now,
The
because
question is,
we may never get to the end.
the question is why?
Why what?
The difference you're showing now between states that voted for Biden and.
I think it's because, again, what could have changed between 2019 and 2020? Okay, we control for income, by the way. So if income does affect the rate of accidents. For example, other things being equal, if you have a higher per capita income in the state, there's less accidents. Okay, so we're controlling for changes in income between 2019 and 2020. We're also controlling for changes in density, population density. We're controlling for everything we can think of. And so the only thing that happened that was kind of big time news between 2019 and 2020 was we had this epidemic. So I'm saying, even though I can't prove it, I think that the general shift, by the way, there is a general shift between 2019 and 2020. Like if you look at this graph, okay, if this is 2019, so there is a general shift. And if you look at 2018, by the way, which we also did, it's like that. 2018 looks like 2019. And this is, if the shift had been like this, if the shift had been a straight parallel line, we'd say, okay, everyone was just stressed out more, and that makes sense because, the pandemic was serious and we were very concerned about it between March and June, but that's not what happened. This is the graph between July and October, okay? If I switch now and look at March to June, again, 2018 and 2019 are exactly like this, but 2020 goes like this, okay? There's a big rise in the, okay, in the fatalities per mile traveled in Democratic states. This slope is still negative. Maybe I drew it a little bit too much. Don't worry. I mean, it's still negative. It's still that in Republican states there were more fatalities per miles driven, but not too many. So I'm actually saying, yeah, I think it was caused. I think the shift outward. You know, this one is July to October, and this is 2020 March to June. So I think we can all agree that probably people were more stressed, so it's not surprising that this shifted out. That's whatever, if you read articles in the academic press and the popular press, that's what everyone says. And that's fine, it makes sense. What's interesting to us is the fact that it shifted like this. And I think that's because, for many reasons, in democratic states, people felt more stress. Okay, on average, not maybe individuals, but on average. And again, if you listen to the news, I kind of listened a little bit to the news between CNN and Fox, and there was a big difference between the way it was presented. Does that answer your question or not?
Well, I'm waiting to the end to see it.
Okay, because I mean the rest of it's going to be kind of boring, econometric analysis type of stuff. So we can have the dialogue now. Yes.
Maybe I agree. I understand what the correlation, but maybe other reason. Maybe being diabetic or bad eating habits of fast food or smoking clog the system and cause them a long COVID, and being with the difficulty of breathing, it delayed it prolonged the thinking, the reaction to accidents, to dangerous situations, and that caused the severe increase in accidents.
I know, no, there is a curve, but you can't.
A technical request from the video, if you can briefly repeat the question.
Okay, yes.
It doesn't pick
Okay, so the question is, maybe other things explained it. Well, look, I mean, diabetes does cause problems, but diabetes exists in Republican states and Democratic states.
But maybe different places have different eating habits.
I know, but we're controlling for all that stuff. See, the nice thing about doing changes from year to year, I don't think these habits change so extremely. Okay, again, you have to say that all of a sudden in Democratic states, people started going to McDonald's like 100 times a day, or smoking 2 packs of cigarettes instead of 1, and then going. You have to, but maybe that's also caused by stress. But still, the nice thing about doing a comparison over a short period of time, okay, over a short period of time, is not too much changed in the way, in that kind of stuff. And again, if you want to say that it had such an effect, why did it go back down to this between July and October? You have to explain both of these things, because long COVID existed for a much longer period, okay? So, if it didn't go back down or something like that, but it did go back down and become a parallel shift, yeah?
I guess that the type of driving was the type of סוג של הנסיעות, because you're driving now, you're not driving to your friends anymore, you're also driving only for emergencies. So by definition, those type of driving are more stressful, even if we leave the fact that there is a pandemic, because of the lockdown.
Right, but I mean, there were lockdowns in almost all states, and people got sick in almost all states. I mean, more people got sick on average in some of the southern states, so they would probably be, which are Republican states, so they would also be, driving to the emergency room. So.
But if we are in a state where people are more respectful to the lockdown and they believe more in the necessity of the lockdown, then we would imagine that they would drive less, and we see that. And then again, the type of driving, the type of, the reason that makes people get out of their home and get into the car would be like more.
Yeah, I see what you're saying. I mean, I can't totally control for that, but that's consistent with stress. If you're saying that, you know, I'm just kind of driving and there's not too many people on the road and I just drive into a telephone pole because I'm going 100 miles an hour to get to the emergency room, which is, you know, half a kilometer away. Okay, I still think that still could be caused by stress. Okay, I mean, I don't know how, these data do not give you information on how, you know, what type of driving changed. But you know, and if it did, I mean, you know, to have a car fatality, that's, I mean, God forbid anyone have one, but that's kind of hard to, you know, to have a, you know, a fatality that causes, I mean, having a car accident causes a fatality, Mark?
Well, I guess I can wait, but I want to push a little bit harder on this point and related points.
Okay. I mean, yeah, you could, let's ask questions because I really want to get feedback and, okay. I'll just maybe flip to graphs, you know, because it's kind of cool. This is, just as for 1 second, is 2020. This is our estimated model. We do a fixed effect models, which probably some people in the room know what it is, some people don't. There's a continuous treatment variable, which is, you know, the vote for Biden. So we kind of control for all the things you need to control. At the state level, at the month level, we have fixed effects. This is, look at, this is the non-parallel shift between March to June. I mean, this distance is huge compared to this distance, so it's exactly like I drew it. And if you go back to 2000, if you go back to the second 4-month period we're looking at, it dramatically drops back. So it's even, this is even a little closer than this, okay? So anything that's going to explain it, you have to address the fact that these 4-month periods are different. So go ahead, Mark.
Well, the thing is, you're controlling for things, I presume you mean you're controlling for them additively, as shifts. But some of the points made here are about heterogeneity in the effect of this. In other words, it's not just that Republican states are different, you know, Oklahoma's different than Florida. Well, I don't know what Florida is anyway. But it's that the effect of the stress might be different in the states for objective reasons. For example, the one that you were raising, which is if people, what happened to the composition of driving, okay? Let me just finish the point.
Go ahead.
The composition of driving. So if it turns out that I only go, it doesn't have to be just emergencies, but I only go when I really need to go, okay? That kind of driving might be very different. For example, I drive a longer distance, right? Or I'm driving to the Walmart or whatever.
But you're not driving longer distances. There's that much fewer miles driven.
Okay, or shorter distance. It doesn't matter. But the point is the composition of, unless you're thinking that a mile is a mile is a mile, okay? And that the probability of an accident for any given mile is completely homogeneous. In that case, I understand. But I would think that that's not the case. I mean, if you're driving in the inner city as opposed to going to the suburbs and so on. I'm not saying that this explains it, but what I'm saying is I think you have to take more seriously, or at least take, I don't know how you've done it in the paper yet, but to worry about these kinds of effects. And it's not just, I'm not denying that there's stress, but what I'm saying is that there's other kinds of heterogeneity that would not be just shifting heterogeneity, but that would be correlated with this proxy for, you know, this electoral proxy for who knows what.
Okay, but then it goes back pretty quickly.
So it won't be eliminated by your differences.
Oh, okay, I know, I want to touch on, but it goes back pretty quickly. I mean, I can't control for that. The kind of data that they have from the Department of Transportation doesn't control for that. I understand what you guys are saying. It's a legitimate point. I don't think it's going to wipe this effect out. Okay, because it's really so dramatic. I mean, if you look at the northeastern states, which I didn't put them up yet, but they're states that vote very heavily for Biden. There's 8 of them, 6 New England states, plus New Jersey and New York. With exception for 2 of the smaller states, Biden got more than 57% in all those states. That's a big deal. In the first 4 months of 2020, that, you know, the percentage change in fatalities per miles driven wasn't just 45, it was 82, okay? It was 82 in those 8 states. That's a huge difference compared to 22 in in states that voted for Trump. So those are states that really voted for Biden. That's 4 times as much. The percentage change is 4 times as much.
What happened to accidents, not fatal accidents? Because if I'm stressed, I'm also likely to have an accident, which may or may not be fatal.
I know, but it's hard to.
Wait a minute. So if this argument is really valid, then I would expect to see some kind of comparable shift, maybe not quantitatively comparable, for accidents. Do you?
I mean, again, the data, we're leery of looking at, I don't think the transportation, we can check, I don't think it calculates or provides data on just accidents. Again, and what's the definition of an accident? Today the I-Alone was closed for like an hour because there was a fender bender. That will be defined as an accident because they called the insurance companies. So I don't know the severity of the accident. So maybe there were a lot more.
Understate the effect rather than overstate.
Yeah, I know. So I don't know the severity, but I think deaths are a good measure. I mean, fatalities, a case where someone dies, that's I think a pretty good measure. And that's one of the reasons we went with this and not with other stuff. I mean, you can look at heart attacks and things like that, but I think this is a really objective measure of what we're trying to do. I'm not denying any of the things you guys said. I just won't be able to really control for all this stuff. And given the huge numbers we're seeing and that it all went back. By the way, in those northeastern states, it dropped down to more or less the average between July and October. These are big rises and big drops in a very short period of time. And again, when we compare it to 2018 and 2019 look the same. So in 2020, this is the shift from July to October, and this is, okay, everyone kind of was stressed, but it's such a huge difference. I think all this stuff would be nice if we had the data, but it'd be kind of hard to, I don't think it can be explained away. I think there's something there. Yeah?
Can you speak to actual COVID rates in these states? Like, could some of it be, I don't know, people who weren't driving with COVID?
They could, but the problem with COVID, and I've actually written a few papers on the pandemic. Okay, the problem with that is, not everyone tests. So again, the number of cases, what does it measure? I could look at that. Yeah, I could look at that. I could look at hospitalizations to see whether there's change. Maybe that's a good idea. Maybe we can find that data, Maya. Who else wanted to ask a question? Yeah.
Do you have the demographics about the people involved in these accidents?
Do we?
Maybe compare them to the average, like what happened in the former years.
Here, Aaron.
The type of drivers change.
Okay, that's a good idea. We can do that. We do have the demographics of those involved in the accident. So we could see whether there was a difference between 18, 19, and 20, and especially between these 2 different 4-month periods. Okay, that's an excellent idea. I didn't want to talk too much, Aaron. I wanted to get feedback here.
Well,
I'm running out of time.
You've got 5 minutes.
Roey?
Yeah, so this is really interesting, and I think there's good evidence that the Republicans and the Democrats treated the pandemic differently. There are quite a few good papers on that. So clearly something is going on. But I'm still concerned about the change in driving behavior. So one option is that just these states that had more lockdowns, fewer people were driving in traffic. When you're in congested traffic, you can't have a fatal accidents typically. And I wonder if you can at least maybe control for the time of day. So if during midnight, when there's no traffic anyway, you still see a change in accidents, that could be stress-driven and couldn't be related to driving behavior.
That's a good point. Go ahead. Did you want to say something else? So I guess I should say what was said here, because otherwise it won't be recorded. Roy suggests that we should look at the time of day because, maybe if the roads were empty in Massachusetts, everyone drove like a maniac. And, so then maybe if you compare midnight to midnight, when generally the roads are free all the time, that might help out. So we have the time of the accident, so we can do that. So these are great comments. Yeah, David.
Do you have what type of car was in the accident? Because I'm thinking like a Ford 150 is definitely driven by a Republican, and a Prius is definitely driven by a Democrat.
Yeah, but that wouldn't change between March to June and July to October. They would still be the same car.
You can control by area then. You can see if people in Priuses are getting more accidents even in New York, then it's probably because they're watching CNN and it's freaked out. But the Ford 150, even in New York, they're watching Fox News and they're chill.
Right, but again, the cars, the cars that people drove didn't change too much. Okay, we can try to, I don't know, do we have the cars? Do we have, okay. We'll look and see if we have those Priuses. Okay, any other questions? These are really good questions. Maya, you're keeping track of everything, right? Because this is how we'll revise it.
Well, you can look on video, although, again, the question.
Okay, right, we do have the video.
Okay, you've got 3 minutes.
No, I'm going to stop now because I think we got a lot of feedback. I don't feel like it's necessary to go through the econometrics. Did you want to say something else?
No, just a comment. So again, obviously I'm not from economics, so I think
That's good, actually. I mean, it's good not to be
so,
from it.
No, that's being impartial. But actually, it's more a sociological issue. So my impression is that it's not that Democrats are more stressed. That they cope less well with stress. So they react. They become less.
By the way, that is true. I didn't want to bring that into the talk, but there are articles that Maya found that say Democrats are in, okay, maybe cut the video here, are in worse mental health than Republicans because they can't cope with stress as well. There are articles that say that. Okay, so, I mean, sometimes I think you're right. I mean, I didn't want to bring it out too much because, as my wife said, we don't want to make this a political thing.
That's an example of not of a shift, but of a heterogeneous effect shift. In other words, it's going to change it's going to affect the slope story.
But that's fine. If they can't cope with stress, I mean, that's fine with me. I mean, having more stress, I mean, I guess we're kind of implying, and we should rewrite it this way, that it's that you can't cope with stress. Some people can cope with stress, so I don't think that's inconsistent with our argument.
Do you have any conclusions?
Drive safely.
No conclusion from your research.
I don't have anything else to say beyond what we said. I don't like to give conclusions if they're kind of just the same. I mean, I think we identified something, and I'll let Dan talk, but we can talk later.
Okay, thank you.